Chapter 30. Hope. They returned as a team reconciled to the hangar and found Dr. Nebo speaking with the instructor. He took a look at Gideon, and the faintest glimmer of hope crossed his eye as he concluded his conversation and made his way to his students. Nebo was the one who spoke.
Children, these orders from Beacon were made with extreme trust in your abilities. Gideon Semblance will play an ideal role in confronting the most evil being on the earth. You must buy him time to confront the target.
He brought up a map on his scroll. Olivia's eyes brightened up at the sight.
Ooh, when do I get one of those?
He laughed.
Should only be a couple of months, assuming your warranty hasn't expired.
She pouted at the inside joke between them.
The castle is infested with Grimm and located near a point where they seem to be entering this world.
Havelai looked at the instructor.
You think she's where they're all coming from?
He shook his head. She's one of them, he stated matter-of-factly.
That's our only goal here.
Nebo nodded to his friend and raised his hand out to shake Daniel's.
And I want to sincerely apologize for all that you went through with Abimelech. If you'd require any counseling or care, you'll come see me directly.
He eyed Gideon in particular.
That goes for any of you.
He nodded at the gesture picked up in his peripheral vision. I think we found out what the problem was. The instructor Nebo nodded and continued.
We're sorry to put you through all of this, but the mission is of the highest priority, and the information you recovered showed us that her magic can be overcome.
Team Gold collectively looked up at that phrase.
Magic?
Nebo nodded.
We're not sure what to call it, but no more unnatural than the semblances you all hold.
He pressed a few buttons on his scroll, and all of theirs rang.
You can review this information at your leisure. Right now, you need to know that these orders are from Beacon. Eliminate the witch, and the Grimm lose their coordinator. You disbanded a bandit tribe. Now you can confront the greatest threat to human and faunus flourishing in this world with a single blow.
Havelai met the doctor with a sharp stare.
And they're only sending 4 of us?
He shook his head.
No. We're only sending one of you.
He gestured towards Gideon.
You are all here to make sure he comes back alive. Understand?
Their backs all straightened and nodded in reply. Good, the instructor said. We'll see you back here in 6 hours, Huntsman. His confidence in them relieved some of the tension, and they made their way to the airship. Various individuals began loading medical equipment and dust around them, and the growing arsenal brought the weight of their task back to the forefront of their minds. Havelai worked her fingers and began counting the equipment to keep herself busy. Olivia made her way to Daniel's side and held onto his arm. Daniel returned the gesture by drawing his arm around her. Gideon simply put one foot in front of the other. The voices drowned out by the commotion around them. The airship's loading ramp closed behind them, and he turned to meet Nebo directly in the eye. And the moment he did, one emotion briefly passed through his psyche. Fear. These kinds of rapid deployments weren't unfamiliar to any of them. Havelai made a habit of scheduling raids in clusters for her group, and even set an unwritten record for 5 hunts in 1 week. She never actually needed rest, and her team had learned to keep pace with her. Daniel knew how to take the abuse with grace, and given recent events had coped with more emotional blows than fatigue could ever inflict on him. Olivia made every effort to be with Daniel since they had met. It wasn't a surprise to anyone that they were now engaged. It was merely pitiable that they couldn't celebrate with their classmates and fellow huntsmen. She had adapted to worse climates. Their eyes fell on Gideon, who had taken his seat and began casually looking over the information Nebo had sent to all of them. With another fleeting glance, they all decided to do the same. Pre-flight discipline had become second nature to every one of them, and focusing on the task at hand couldn't have been more simple. Make sure there's an exit. Gideon would take care of the rest. They all expressed concern in their own ways, but this was different. There wasn't a single one of them that could decide what was the right thing to do. Daniel's approach and direct counsel wouldn't find solid ground after the source of Gideon's imbalance had already been addressed. He thought the only way he could see this benefiting Gideon long term was to address those issues as they came, rather than when they took root. Olivia's pursuits of physical comfort would be limited by where she could be for him at any given time, and that couldn't be all the time. Havelia spent more time chiding herself for a lack of empathy. The years had taught her not to expect from others what she had come to expect of herself. Weakness couldn't be confronted by anyone but the one who had it. They all watched him as his visor remained fixed on his scroll. A full 10 minutes passed before he looked up again. They had all taken passing glances here and there during this time, but the information was only 2 pages if copied onto paper.
Is something wrong, Gideon?
Havelia asked with a measured tone. He tilted his head slightly and looked like he was struggling for words. Daniel took another look at his scroll and back at his friend. Is there something here Gideon cut him off. The instructor told me they had found my mother. This report says the witch only has 4 daughters to her name, and their locations are unknown. Yet this mission is an assassination. What? He paused again.
Are we here to do?
Olivia tried.
Is actually going on?
Havelia suggested. Daniel shook his head. What are you? Gideon looked up and took off his visor. He was relieved not to feel any fear from them, but it was undoubtedly seen by his face. He looked at the sword in his hand, and they all instinctively quieted when his attention was drawn to it.
What has this done to me?
Havelia took a firm step forward.
Nothing! Stop talking to yourself like this. There's nothing...
She stopped herself.
It's just you, Gideon. It's just you. You have a job to do, now let's see it to the end.
Gideon finally looked away, and a slight trembling could be seen under his armor.
End.
Daniel knew where this was going and quickly changed the subject. We're 15 minutes from our destination. We need to figure out where we're going to land.
Gideon monotonically replied.
Just draw in a nevermore. I'll write it down. Olivia quietly interjected.
And where do you want us to pick you up?
Gideon didn't answer.
Gideon!
Havelia yelled, commanding all of their attention. He shook his head and gave a small smile. I'm okay, Leia. I'm going to get this done. She held her gaze for another several seconds until her training took over and the green light turned on from their pilot.
Get ready to deploy.
She still held the same tone, but knew there was a time and place. Olivia opened the rear hatch and began looking for a nevermore. She didn't have to look long. They were everywhere. With the ominous black backdrop of their destination, storm clouds resounded a call that let them all know they weren't welcome. The cabin began to shake as Olivia started opening fire. Daniel quickly made his way over and grabbed his friend's hand. We'll be waiting for you due south. Try to leave some of the building intact so you know which direction to run. He patted his shoulder and gripped the nearest harness. Havelia was still staring at him as he made his way out of the airship. With a running start, he leaped and began his descent, allowing the Grimm to find their way to him. Olivia let off another several shots and went to close the hatch. Yet as she turned around, she saw one of the reserve chutes was missing, along with another one of her team. She glanced back and saw the canopy opening, along with an unmistakable auburn tail.
Havelia!
She yelled, and after a moment's hesitation, regrettably closed the rear door.